In 1989, I went on a backpacking trip through Europe. I was a lot younger then. And I was in Germany. This was back before we had cell phones and even before the internet. I know, I see your amazed face. That's how old I am. So I had made reservations to stay at a family hostel, which is a kind of like a camp with a building. And I was heading to the little village where that hostel was. And I had done something kind of stupid, but this happens sometimes when you're traveling. What I did is I forgot to eat for that day. I was in northern Germany, and I was rushing to catch trains and to travel around. And I thought, I would be able to find some food in the next place. And this can sometimes happen. I know children, when you're on a road trip and you get hungry for a snack, and someone might say, well, there will be something up ahead, and sometimes there isn't anything up ahead. So I hadn't eaten for a whole day, and it was already afternoon, so I was feeling my tummy really grumble. I had planned to grab breakfast that morning, but I got off the train, and I noticed, oh, wow, this really is a little village in the middle of nowhere. It was a little town called Hannover Schmunden, and there were just mountains around me. And I realized, this was really definitely not a smart thing. I should have gotten a sandwich. So I found out that the hostel I was staying at was actually several miles away, and there were no taxis. So, there I was, hungry with my backpack, and I said, I'm young and strong, and the sun is hot, but I'm going to just hike out to the hostel. And also a silly thing that I forgot was my hat. Never go hiking without a hat. I should have had that to protect me from the sun. But I was hiking along thinking, I'll get there, I'll have a big nice meal, I'll be able to relax, take a shower. By the time I got there, I was quite dizzy and really famished. And I walked into the hostel, and I introduced myself to a man behind a glass partition. And I said, I have a reservation. I could see a big rec hall with lots of tables set out and families eating because it was already dinner time. Well, the man was not interested in me. He looked at a little list, he said, you do not have a reservation. I said, yes, I do, please, I do. I called from Sweden a few days ago. No, he said, we have no record of you. I was beginning to be frightened. He hardly looked at me. He looked at his papers, frowning. I was bothering him, and he was almost angry. Well, I didn't speak his language, and he didn't speak much of my language, and I said, bitte, please, in German. I gave my credit card number, I prepaid. And he said, give me your passport and your credit card. Well, I gave him both of those things, and he disappeared for a long time. The meal I saw was starting to end and getting cleaned up and put away. And remember how hungry I was, hadn't eaten now for more than 24 hours. And the man came back. He said, you may stay here for one night, and this is your bunk number. I said, I was supposed to stay for 2 nights. He said, you may stay here for one night. And I said, may I have some dinner, please? He said, absolutely not. Dinner is over, you have missed it, and you had no reservation. I could see the families eating. I thought, should I run past this man and make a scene, beg and throw myself on their mercy? I felt panicked. Why was he being like this? Who would refuse a hungry traveler food, and why? Who might help me? The man refused to answer any more questions. In fact, when I tried to persist in conversation, he put his head down and pretended that I wasn't there. I went to my bunk, and I fell asleep for a couple of hours, and when I woke, I was so hungry and thirsty and miserable that I cried. I was scared. I didn't know the language. I didn't have any more than a few Deutsche Marks, which is the kind of money they had in Germany then. I didn't know if I felt well enough to walk all the way back to the train station. And then I heard a woman's voice say, what's wrong with you? It was not a mean voice, but just straightforward. And I realized I was no longer alone in my room, but I had a bunkmate, a tall blonde woman who seemed to be in her 20s, with a sunburned face and a long braid. Well, I was embarrassed to tell her. I said, "Oh, I'm fine," and I got up, unsure of what to do next. I decided that I would ask her about herself, and I learned that she was an Austrian who was biking alone across Europe and heading home from Scandinavia, so she was heading south. The sun was setting and our room was small, so we made our way outside to a picnic bench in a meadow next to the building. There was nothing but meadow and mountains as far as my eye could see, and in the near distance I could hear someone playing "Let It Be" on a guitar, and people singing along with heavy German accents. Wherever you go in the world, someone's playing the Beatles. It would have been so beautiful if I wasn't so hungry and thirsty and dizzy. My companion, whose name I am sorry that I have forgotten, asked me again why I had been crying. I decided that I would tell her my predicament. "Ah," she said impatiently, "that guy must not like Americans or Jews." I was startled by that, as I hadn't identified myself as Jewish or told her my last name, but she guessed my heritage just by looking at me, and she was right. Her steady gaze made me very uncomfortable, but as William Faulkner once wrote, "The past isn't dead, it isn't even past." I thought, "Oh my God, it's 1989, are you kidding me? I thought all of this was over 50 years ago." Well, I have learned since then that hatred lasts a long, long time, even after it is supposedly resolved. And I'm sorry, this is something that we all know. And my bunkmate said, "Wait here." So I waited in the dusk, and in a few minutes she returned with a bottle of some kind of soda from a machine and a bundle wrapped in cloth, very much like an old-fashioned hobo's bundle. She put the bottle of soda and the bundle on the picnic table between us and took out her Swiss Army knife with careful formality. First, she popped the soda bottle and gave it to me, saying, "Here." And I said, "Oh no, there's only one bottle we can share." And she said, fairly sternly, "No, you have it." Then she opened her cloth bundle. She opened it up. Carefully nestled within it was a medium-large hunk of brown, or actually black bread, several foil triangles of Laughing Cow cheese, and a green pepper. My mouth started watering just looking at what seemed to me in that moment to be a feast. But what could I do? She had ridden her bike all day and must also be famished. I couldn't impose on her. I kept my eyes on the picnic bench and licked my dry lips, sipping my soda. With a sense of ceremony, my companion took her knife and she cut the bread into 2 equal pieces. She then did the same with the pepper, whose fragrance, when sliced, made me giddy. She then performed the same surgery on a small triangle of cheese because there were 3 little wedges. So she sliced that third one exactly down the center. She then took my half of the food, 1 hunk of black bread, half of a green pepper, and exactly 1.5 wedges of cheese, and set it before me so that I could not mistake her intention. "Here," she said, "you should eat this." "Oh, I couldn't," I said. "You must be as hungry as I am, and it's not very much." "You should eat it," she said, somewhat like a teacher correcting a student. "This is what travelers do. We share our food. We feed each other." She was not messing around with me. She was very clear. She had learned this, and she was committed to practicing it. I was so awkward And unable to receive her hospitality at first, I'm embarrassed to say that I took my few coins out of my pocket and put them on the table. She gave me a well-deserved scowl and ignored the coins. I thought, I'm such a tacky American to offer money in exchange for what is so freely given. I gratefully, so gratefully, ate that black bread, the cheese, and half of the green pepper. It was a meal I still can remember, and never without tears. It was heavenly. It gave me the strength that I needed to have a peaceful sleep, put my backpack over my shoulders early the next morning, and walked to the train station where I caught the first train out of Germany. And I have never been back. Here is what I learned from this experience that seems so obvious, but I'll tell you, although I'm sure you have probably figured it all out. First of all, it takes only one person to be cold and rejecting for any reason to make a visitor to any place never want to come back. Second, I learned that it is actually more frightening to feel unwelcome than it is to be very, very hungry. I think if that man had offered me sympathy and understanding, even if there had been no food, I would have been fed with that and felt the physical hunger much more manageable. Third, accepting kindness and hospitality can be harder than giving it. We must all learn how to receive and to give. Fourth, travelers feed each other. We do not need to be friends first. We do not need to know much about each other. We need only to remember that to be noticed and cared about and shared with is what that feeding looks like. And finally, we must all remember that we are all travelers here on this earth.